Well, July is Savings Month in South Africa, but it comes in the midst of a cost of living crisis, not just here at home, but in other parts of the world as well. Well, South African households are going through a tough time with the ongoing power cuts from Eskom, stage 4 and 6 so far. We've also been hit by another fuel price increase, which is set to come into effect from midnight. All of this then feeds into a wider question about how the economy is going to do in both the short and longer term. Let's speak about all of this with Economist Sifiso Skenjana. Sifiso, always good to have you on Newzroom Afrika. Welcome. So, first things first, July Savings Month, but what is there to save at this point?
Good afternoon, Tembekile, and a cold, expensive, and dark greeting to the viewers at home as well. Yeah, I mean, it's an absolute catastrophe that we find ourselves in terms of just every single thing that I guess, could potentially be going wrong, seems to be going wrong in the context of our country. Unemployment is in crisis. Cost of living, we're seeing now effective 1 July administered prices, so water, electricity, those are coming up as well. And then, of course, fuel and cost of food and every single thing there. And when we're also looking at some of the bank serve numbers, we're seeing that the take-home pay has dropped about 6.7% month on month. And also when we look at the quarterly employment statistics, we're seeing that companies are opting to employ people more now on temporary jobs and permanent jobs. And so all of these things are certainly telling you, one, that you're going to have a more distressed household context. But at the same time, it means that I don't think that we're going to see a reprieve anytime soon. And then if that's not worse, we're sitting in the dark. And, of course, we're waiting now for the Monetary Policy Committee to come up with probably 50 basis points increase. And so Savings Month certainly going to, have nothing for us to save at this particular point besides, a little bit of this and that here and there.
Let's speak about what you were just referring to, unemployment. I mean, in the last review, it was down slightly, but still at record highs. How much worse do you expect it to become now that you've got this storm, really, of economic pressure on people and businesses?
I mean, one of the conversations we had with Statistician General around even the unemployment numbers is that I think we're probably going to see revisions in the coming quarters, because statistics tend to do that. They trickle in, and then when when you've got a fuller view of those numbers, and then they're often what they do as statistical revisions. I'm not entirely convinced that the economy is coming back into full health when you look at all the leading indicators in terms of business activity. That is looking at, it's way below benchmark levels there. If you're looking at all those things that give you a true sense of health of the economy, and as I was talking about, as well as what came out of the quarterly employment statistics, where there's a substitution effect that is happening in terms of full-time and part-time jobs, and that, for me, is the leading indicator that we must be looking at, and that means firms are not making a real employment investment. And therefore, that number is not, it certainly, for me, needs a little bit more unpacking to see what lives beneath that hood. But at this point in time, I'm not entirely convinced that we are on a bounce back from an employment outcomes point of view. I actually think, even if you look at our human capital development indices, all of those are declining as well. Our poverty exposure is increasing as well, as our inequality is increasing. So none of it, for me, is saying that the economy is moving into a healthier space, which then would be associated also with jobs accretion like we saw in the recent numbers.
You then have those same businesses, especially when you look at the focus in this country on the informal sector and how it's carried many of the poorer South Africans, when they are having to go now with up to 8 hours a day of load shedding. Let's say, for example, you hit from 8 to 10 o'clock, right? And then again from noonish or 2 p.m. and in the evening. How does a business even begin to recover the lost time?
It's absolutely catastrophic, Tembekile. I mean, we sometimes Eskom will come on 5 minutes before they start load shedding and say with load shedding in 5 minutes. Imagine now you're baking bread. What happens to those loaves when they can't rise anymore? You've got to throw them away. And these are the reality. If you're washing someone's hair at the salon with a hair dryer, and then in 5 minutes' time you've got to close your salon, these are realities of small businesses. Over and above that, Tembekile, when you look at all of the big items in terms of where we've seen inflationary pressures, cooking oil, paraffin, poloni. These are all the things that people are selling into the economy, but they don't have the immediate opportunity to push those prices through to the consumer. And so these small businesses are also catching a double whammy where Eskom is, of course, disrupting their business, and they've got inflationary pressures they can't push onto the business. In fact, one of the pieces of research I was hearing now coming from Gigi Alcock, who does a lot of economic research, was saying that on average, a lot of people who are leasing out their back-home dwellings haven't increased rentals for their tenants, not because there's no demand, but it's actually almost an embedding of the economic realities of those people who just don't have enough money to continue paying escalating rents, and so they're actually holding back on increasing those rentals, particularly in the township context, because of just how stressed financially households are. And so it's just absolutely catastrophic at this point in time.
We were speaking yesterday to the Road Freight Association about the pressures on them and how if haulage is costing them more, that then means ultimately the cost will be transferred to you and I, the consumer. But the consumer is also the worker, let's say, at a large retailer who depends on the taxi system, and the taxi association is saying, well, we too have to hike fares because petrol is becoming so expensive. They're going to be paying another R2 plus for a litre from tomorrow morning. And when you put all of that together, is there any intervention at this point that can be brought forward, implemented, to at least soften the blow? I mean, not get rid of it completely because it's such a massive problem, but can anything be done to help?
I think, Cape Verde has declared a social and economic emergency in their country right now, state of emergency due to rising inflation, and they've implemented price control measures in response. And so what that means is that, one, I think legislatively there are things we can do. I'll make an example. When Comair collapsed, what did that other airline do? They shot prices up through the roof, right? And when we saw even the likes of Dis-Chem during COVID, when they were eventually fined by the Competition Commission. So one, I think from a legislative point of view, Competition Commission, give it teeth to be able to put price ceilings at a point in time where there's, the temporary price ceilings and you're just cushioning the blow. Over and above that, when you then declare some state of emergency, and then you're going to start to think about reappropriation of budget in a way in which it can particularly respond to the most marginalized. It's also something that, of course, has been called for, particularly regarding unemployment in South Africa, is that we need to actually call it what it is, which is at this point in time it's a catastrophe, it's a pandemic, it's an emergency, and we've got to then gear resources to be able to reinvest in the sectors that can very quickly generate the kind of employment outcomes we need.
So that is for the poor, but very quickly, Sifiso, I mean, for the middle-class South African, people with bonds, a car, we're now waiting for a rates announcement from the Monetary Policy Committee. If that goes up, what's it going to do for a middle class that also hasn't seen an increase in wages, in some cases, since the beginning of the pandemic, which was 2 years ago?
I mean, we barely have a middle class. It's about 7%. I did a better kind of back of the envelope calculation. About 7% of the labor force is middle class in South Africa. Big 70% of the people in South Africa can't afford a living wage, which is living beyond 7,700 rand. And if you're earning 48,000 rand, you're in the top 1 earning percent. And so you can imagine the price sensitivity that you've got to a 50 basis points increase in interest rates if you're somewhere in that middle class and that non-existent middle class. But certainly I think directly to is that it's just going to get increasingly tougher. People now have to travel also to office because of load shedding. It increases their costs because they didn't plan for those costs. And all of these things, people have to buy UPSs and all of that. Everyone, I think, is in a corner right now, and we just need to see some interventions at this point in time.
Sifiso Skenjana, Economist, good to have your time. Thank you.